El ejército en Colombia no se ha...
The army in Colombia is not convinced that its most important task is to protect the civilian population. The army thinks that its priority is to destroy the guerrilla, not to protect the population.
La protección de la población.
Focused on destroying all leftist opposition in Colombia. The military and paramilitary do not differentiate between guerrillas and political or social activists. Communities located in areas controlled by the FARC or the ELN are also perceived as enemy and heavily victimized. This phenomenon accounts for a massive internal displacement of rural populations that eventually seek refuge into town. With 1.5 million displaced and often living in sordid conditions, Colombia today has the third largest population of internal refugees in the world.
Displacing populations is part of a military strategy. This is also part of the strategy of other armed groups as well. It is a phenomenon that is responding to military, political, and economic interests. It all depends on which zone we're talking about.
The reality in Barranca Bermeja and the Magdalena Medio is no different from most parts of the country where institutions seem to have disintegrated from inside, worn by the acid of fear, corruption, intolerance, and racism. Even more so than other communities, Afro-Colombians have had to suffer the full force of military and paramilitary terror.
Ejemplo, en el departamento del Chocó, en su zona norte, hubo algunas...
In the department of Choco in the north, there were communities that were bombarded by the national forces of Colombia and that were attacked by both the military and the paramilitary. Massacres were carried out, and eventually some of our people were forced to abandon their lands. We're talking here about an area of paramount strategic importance for the world's biodiversity. And for that reason, they are displacing our people who collectively own these territories.
They showed up on June 10th exactly. It was a rather large group. We, as a community, didn't get a chance to count them because our policy is not to interact with any irregular armed party. But many delegates from national and international non-governmental organizations were there, and they confronted this group. Later, they gave us a report that there were 200 soldiers, both paramilitary and military, from different battalions of the Colombian army.
The next day, on the morning of the 11th, the paramilitaries came back, mixed with soldiers from the Colombian army. They were firing grenades and gunshots at the village. People started running everywhere. Several people got wounded, and they took a man. They tied him up, they tore his clothes off, they castrated him, and they killed him bit by bit. They were throwing his body parts to the dogs. People were caught in a frantic panic. Mothers were grabbing children that were not theirs because in panic you can't see anymore. Women were fleeing in the river. Some ran naked as they could towards the jungle. They attacked the civilian population, but there was no guerrillas. Even if they say that the paramilitaries are a separate group, this is not true. The paramilitaries are the offspring of the military.
Right now, the U.S. should be telling the Colombian military that we're not going to give them one penny in military assistance until they clean up their act, until they sever all ties with paramilitary groups.
Reports from Human Rights Watch, from the U.S. State Department, clearly document the connection between the Colombian military and these paramilitary groups. They receive intelligence from the Colombian military, they receive aid, they receive training, they're in direct communication through meetings on military bases, through beepers and cell phone communications that have been documented.
Definitely, there is no such thing as a relationship or a collaboration between the armed forces and the paramilitary. This has never happened and will never happen.
July 23rd, 2001. The arrest of General Rito Alejo del Rio makes the Colombian headlines. He is the highest-ranking Colombian army officer ever to be officially exposed for complicity in paramilitary violence. He is also one of the many Colombian officers who graduated from the U.S. Army School of the Americas.
I began to do more and more investigation of other graduates of the school, finding that, you know, some of the worst human rights abusers in Central America, in Panama, in Colombia, graduates from this school.
The School of the Americas was founded by the U.S. government in 1946 at the beginning of the Cold War. First set in Panama, then relocated to Fort Benning, Georgia. It is renamed Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation in 2001 to try to dodge public pressure and an attempt by Congress to shut it down. The School of the Americas has been training over 60,000 officers from all over Latin America with one clear mission: different from traditional military schools.
The Kennedy administration changed the mission of the Latin American military, which of course it controlled. It changed it from hemispheric defense, that's a holdover from the Second World War, to internal security. Internal security is a euphemism which means war against your own population. It armed and trained the Latin American military forces to carry out this war. That led to a huge plague of repression throughout the continent as military dictatorships took over, brutal, murderous ones with U.S. support.
This counterinsurgency warfare, this low-intensity conflict strategy, has been used to terrorize the civilian population, to make everyone afraid to have anything to do with the guerrillas or to give any appearance of support for the guerrillas.
In Colombia, the Kennedy administration sent a mission, a special forces mission, in 1962 to advise the Colombians on how to deal with their internal problems. Their advice was to resort to paramilitary terror against known communist proponents. The term communist means anyone who's independent. So it could be priests, organizing peasants, human rights activists, labor leaders. That's what communist means. Known communist proponents have to be subjected to paramilitary terror.
There's always economic interests directly related to this military and paramilitary action against civilians. For example, we see in Colombia the most intense massacres of civilian populations happen in areas where key economic interests are at stake.
I think part of the plan and part of the interest of the United States in Colombia is not really so much about narcotics, It's about having a friendly regime in Colombia that can implement friendly free market policies that are friendly to U.S. corporations, friendly to the whole notion of expanding NAFTA into Latin America. And obviously that can't be done in a country that's in the middle of fighting a guerrilla war.